And open your Bibles up to Genesis chapter number 29 this morning. Continuing on our series in the book of Genesis, Genesis chapter number 29. You remember last week we see basically Isaac send Jacob off. He's going to look for Laban. He's going to go there to find a wife. And now we end up getting on to Genesis chapter number 29. And anything time that I've been, teaching Sunday school throughout this Genesis series, one of the things that I've really wanted to try to make a point of doing is providing more context just to how things were different back then than we do. And the culture was a lot different. The way that they interacted with one another was different. The customs that they had was different. One thing, kind of spoiling something I'm going to mention later on, but when you think about when people get married today in America, it's like the custom that the father of the bride is going to pay for a lot of that wedding, where very differently you'll see here that Jacob's going to work 7 years in a field for the bride, and then they didn't have a big extravagant wedding at the end of it. Actually, I wasn't very happy at the end of that, which, spoiler alert there if you're not familiar with the story. But, it's just interesting to see the difference between these things. There's a lot of differences between these things. Another one that we're going to see is basically their servants here. And you've noticed when we talked about Abraham, we talked about Isaac, that we're not talking about just like one small family just journeying around. We're talking about a multitude of people that are there with them. And I do want to, just show you, and I think that this is a really good opportunity as we get later on in this chapter and we see Jacob basically being a servant for Laban. One of the very common critiques that people will have of the Old Testament is that, especially too when you read a lot of the newer versions, they'll replace that word servant or talk about servitude and basically with slave, and that these people are slaves. And obviously in America, slave is one of the worst things that could possibly ever happen, and our culture is so against slavery, and rightfully so, but that whenever they hear the word slave, there's just a really negative connotation that we have into our minds, and then people read the Bible that was written 2,000 years before any of this, and this specifically thousands and thousands of years before any of this, and it almost looks like the Bible's condoning, slavery in a certain way, but that's not what's happening here. So I want to look at these things this morning, obviously while still looking at the chapter and everything that's going on in Genesis chapter number 29, but just kind of talk about some of these things and provide some extra context to it. So if you're there in the book of Genesis in chapter number 29, go ahead and start in verse number 1, where it says, "Then Jacob went on his journey and came into the land of the people of the east. And he looked, and behold, a well in the field, and lo, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it, for out on that well they watered the flocks. And a great stone was upon the well's mouth. And thither were all the flocks gathered. And they rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the sheep, and put the stone again upon the well's mouth in his place. And Jacob said unto them, My brethren, whence be ye? And they said, Of Haran are we. And he said unto them, Know ye Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, We know him. And he said unto them, Is he well? And they said, He is well. And behold, Rachel his daughter cometh with the sheep. Verse number 7 says, And he said, Lo, it is yet high day, neither is it time that the cattle should be gathered together, water the sheep, and go and feed them. And they said, We cannot until all the flocks be gathered together, until they roll the stone from the well's mouth, then we water the sheep. And while he yet spake with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass, when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. So Jacob basically comes in. He's coming specifically just to find Laban and look for him. These 3 shepherds notice, let him know that he's come to the right place, that in fact, here's his daughter, which honestly is who Jacob was there looking for anyways. And so he sees her, sees an opportunity. I'm not sure this is exactly what was happening here, but it reminds me of the joke that you just hear whenever you think about people setting up the chairs afterwards, and all of the younger men, if there's a younger woman, will see how many chairs they can carry to impress and how strong they are. Jacob sees Rachel come up and just sees an opportunity to roll this big stone out of the way to take care of these. So maybe that's what was going on there, maybe not, I don't know. But we see Jacob basically have this opportunity to come, and he sees Rachel, everything's coming together in the right place, and so he's going to basically just water the sheep and help her out. And then in verse number 11, it says, "And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept." Now, I don't believe that this was a kiss romantically. I think it was probably just an introductory thing. Another thing that we don't really do in our culture today is just walk up to someone that we've never seen before and kiss them as a way of introduction. That's kind of replaced with a handshake. Sometimes now it's, kind of transitioned back into a fist bump. Handshake's more of just a professional relationship, and now sometimes it's just a wave. We're slowly becoming just not connected as a culture. It's not really a good thing, but definitely far beyond walking up to somebody and kissing them on the cheek and saying hello. So that is not something that you see today. Verse number 12. It says, "And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother, and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. And it came to pass, when Laban heard the tidings of Jacob, his sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him, and kissed him, and brought him to his house, and he told Laban all these things. And Laban said unto him, Surely thou art my bone and my flesh. And he abode with him the space of a month. And Laban said unto Jacob, Because thou art my brother, shouldest thou therefore serve me for naught? Tell me, what shall thy wages be? And Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah was tender-eyed, but Rachel was beautiful and well-favored. And Jacob loved Rachel, and said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. And Laban said, It is better that I give her to thee, than that I should give her to another man. Abide with me. And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days for the love that he had to her. Now, one of the things that I want to mention here, this is something that I was talking about in the introduction, is basically contrasting the difference between what you might think of the Bible condoning slavery, or what you might see here, which is basically just Jacob being a servant to Laban. Now, it's not really spelled out directly here, but a lot of the claims that people will get upset with are things that you read later on in the books of Moses, talking about servitude and things like that. But it's also something just to think about, again, the difference in the time back then to the time that was today. Now, today, when we think about working and we think about the purpose of working, you work generally to make money, because we live in a society where we've got dollars and we use those dollars, or our credit card that has the digital dollars on them, and that's how we pay for everything. And so I don't go out necessarily and just find an empty plot of land and go out into the forest and chop down some trees and live by a stream and construct my house and live that way. I pay for the materials to build that stuff that's already done in the store and, build it up. I don't grow my own food and have my own animals, and some people still do that, and more power to you, but to be honest, I'm not a farmer, and I couldn't do that. I have some family members that they have like half of their yard is just goats and chickens and everything else, and I think that's great, and it's a blessing that they're able to do that. I would not want chickens all over my yard and goats and having to take care of them. So I go to the store when I want to eat food. They go to their backyard and they get their eggs. You save your money on your eggs, but I go to the store. So, but the way that I'm able to do that is because I have money to do those things. But if you think about it, isn't going to the store kind of expensive sometimes? And paying for a roof over your head, it costs a lot of money. And just paying the electricity bill and the gas bill, paying for your transportation to go to and from any place. And that's the reason why you have to make all of that money. And if you don't, then there's probably going to be some type of program you're going to get assistance from to survive so you don't end up on the streets. But hypothetically, if you're not working, you probably shouldn't be eating and having a home over your head and all these other things to begin with, because you need to have a way to actually provide and pay for those bills. So here in Genesis chapter number 29, you have Jacob basically say that he's going to be a servant to Laban and work for Laban for 7 years. And then at the end of those 7 years, he's going to get Rachel. Now, one of the things that I often hear people say when they talk about this subject is that, you know, this is unpaid labor. And that basically the only thing that he gets out of any of this is Rachel. You know, and to that, just think logically here. Rachel is not the only thing that he got. You know, maybe he didn't get a dollar amount, and I think that's just so much of how we think today. When someone's working a job and you're wondering what you're going to get out of the job, generally the only thing you care about is the dollar amount of how many hours you're going to work or what your salary is or anything like that. If there's no salary, you're not going to do it. You know, and I joke with my company a lot. I really love my job. I work a lot. I work hard at the things that I do. I tell them, if you guys stop paying me, I'm not going to do it anymore. You know, and I'll go find somewhere else to do the job, because there's no point to do it to work there if I'm not getting a wage for it. But say that you had an opportunity where basically, if you think logically about it, the reason that you do any of the things that you do is basically to pay for all of your things, pay for your living expenses, pay for your food, pay for all of that other stuff. What if someone gave you the opportunity today and said, come work for me, and I'm not going to pay you anything, but all of your living expenses, the roof that's over your head, the food that you're going to eat, the water that you're going to drink, everything is provided. You know, all you do is just work for me. And then at the end of it, you're going to get, you know, in this case, you know, Rachel, who you want to be married to, who, by the way, you're going to be in close proximity with and spending time with her the entire time you're working here. So a lot of times people look at this and they look at this servitude, and a lot of times I'm sure that there's other translations that will change this into some type of slavery and things like that, and that Jacob basically becomes a slave for 7 years, and then at the end of those 7 years is able to, you know, get what he came for. But that's not all that he got out of this. The entire time, Laban is still giving him food to eat, giving him a roof over his head, and things like that. And again, that's just because, you know, to one aspect, yes, they did have some type of money. You know, you can look and see, and they do talk about some type of currency. But the only thing that they used currency for was basically for land, maybe for animals and things like that. But a lot of times it would just be giving an animal in exchange for a piece of land or something like that. And it wasn't the same way where we could basically go out today and I could say the field that's behind that tree line there, I'm going to find the owner of it and I'm just going to own the land. You know, and I just go to the bank and I give however many thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars it would take to buy all of that land, and I just say, it's mine. You know, but then I never take care of it. It gets completely overgrown and all these other things. If the county says that I own it and I own it, it's mine, you know, whether people like it or not. But back then, we didn't have like a state, county, local government that was drawing out plots of land and saying, this is who owns this, and having a record system, keeping track of everything. And the way you owned that land was that you maintained it. You couldn't just say, I own all of this land, and draw an imaginary line in the sand and say, this is mine. You actually had to take care of it. If you didn't take care of it, it was just open for anyone to come and get it. So that's another reason why they were so inclined to have multiple servants, basically under the umbrella of their home. And their incentive to be a servant was that you got to live with a very wealthy family in terms of when you think about Abraham or Isaac or any of these others, Laban in this case, you get to live there, you get to have the benefits of being with someone like that, and all of your living expenses are provided for. You know, one of the most stressful things I think that people in America have today is just worrying about whether or not you're going to have your expenses paid at the end of the month, whether or not you're going to be able to afford groceries, whether or not you're going to be able to afford to pay rent or pay the mortgage or pay any of these other things. And obviously, you know, there's the thing that would be nice, well, if I work really hard and I work extra hours, maybe I can have some money in the savings account. But really just think about it. What if someone just told you, never have to worry about expenses again for the next 7 years? Just, it's all covered, just work for me. You know, I'll take care of the bills, I'll take care of everything else. So it's not the same type of thing where we basically just have Jacob going to a horrible lifestyle and just doing this all for Rachel and getting nothing else for it. He's also being provided for, and his needs are being taken care of through the entire process. So it's not as bad as it seems, though what we see happen in the next few verses here certainly wasn't a good thing. So verse number 21 says, "And Jacob said unto Laban, everyone," I turned 2 pages there. Jacob said unto Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in unto her." And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. And it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to him, and he went in unto her. And Laban gave unto his daughter Leah Zilpah, his maid, for an handmaid. And it came to pass that in the morning, behold, it was Leah, and he said unto Laban, "What is this that thou hast done unto me? Did not I serve thee for Rachel? Wherefore then hast thou beguiled me?" And Laban said, "It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also for the service that thou shalt serve me with yet 7 other years." And Jacob did so, and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel his daughter to wife also. And Laban gave to Rachel his daughter Bilhah, his handmaid, to her maid. Now, there's 2 schools of thought here for what took place. One of them is that Jacob is basically getting a taste of his own medicine. And when you think back to some of the different things that he did to Esau, and basically deceiving his father at the end to get the blessing instead, getting Esau to give up his birthright, just different things like that. And then basically now he's coming to Laban, and Laban does the same thing to him. And he pulls a trick on him, and instead of getting 7 years of service from him, he's going to get 14 years of service, because then he's still going to want Rachel, and then basically get him to have 7 years. Or there's maybe an optimistic perspective that Jacob came in and 7 years up until this point that we just read about here, asked for Rachel to be married for 7 years of service, and maybe Laban thought within that 7 years Leah will be married and it won't be a problem to give Rachel to be wedded with Jacob, because the issue was in verse number 26, it said, "And Laban said, It must not be so done in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn." So basically, Leah was born first. She had to be married before Rachel. So maybe, if you want to give Laban the benefit of the doubt, which I don't necessarily know you do, but maybe the reason that all of this happened in the first place was because he just thought that by the time these 7 years would have passed, that Leah would have been married already. I don't really know. I don't have an opinion either way. I just was throwing that out to see maybe you have an opinion on it. But regardless, what happens is that Jacob was adamant that he did this for Rachel and that he wanted Rachel. He wasn't going to walk away with Leah, which he did walk away with Leah, but he wasn't going to walk away without Rachel. So he stayed and said that he was going to work another 7 years. Now, I don't believe that he had to work another 7 years without Rachel. I think that a week passed by, they gave him Rachel, and then he was just married with Rachel and Leah for the remainder of those 7 years. And then after that 7 years, he was free to go. Because if you see in verse number 27, it says, fulfill her week, and we will give thee this also. This is Rachel, for the service which thou shalt serve with me yet 7 other years. And Jacob did so and fulfilled her week, and he gave him Rachel, his daughter, to wife also. So I believe that basically a week went by where he was only married to Leah, and then Rachel was given to him to be married also. And then 7 years passed. During that time, he was with both of them throughout that time. Maybe not. I don't think it's a huge deal either way if you think that it was another 7 years that went by before he was able to have Rachel. But based on the wording of that there and the scripture that we see, I'm pretty sure that that's what was going on there. So then if you look down to verse number 30, it says, and he went in also unto Rachel, and he loved Rachel. He loved also Rachel more than Leah, and served with him yet 7 other years. And when the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bare a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, surely the Lord hath looked upon my affliction, now therefore my husband will love me. And she conceived again, and bare a son, and said, because the Lord hath heard I was hated, he hath therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. And she conceived again, and bare a son, and said, now this time will my husband be joined unto me, because I have borne him 3 sons, and called his name Levi. And she conceived again, and bare a son, and she said, now will I praise the Lord. Therefore she called his name Judah, and left barren. So this is basically the start of something that we're going to see, where it's going to turn into almost a competition between Leah and Rachel for who's going to be able to have the most children to Jacob, and who's going to be the most blessed, who's going to be loved more, basically, because they have more children. And so that's what we'll see as we go on into the next chapter or two. This just kind of competition, I guess you could call it, for who's going to have more of the children, which really, it wasn't a competition because it was just the Lord opening and closing the womb. They didn't really have anything to do with it there. It was all God's doing on the back end. But that's another difference, though, that I do want to point out and just kind of wrap up with our culture today to think about, is that you wouldn't necessarily think in our culture today, and I hope I'm not offending anybody by saying this, but generally, what people are looking for today is not to have an enormous family with lots of children and things like that. And when you think about what a young man is going to love his wife for more than anything, it's probably not going to be, definitely not going to have 2 wives in our culture today. But it's definitely not going to be because one of them you just have more children with and the other one doesn't. I mean, there are people that just don't want to have children at all. I saw a statistic the other day that half, I think almost half of young women, and I don't know exactly what the age range of these was, but just have no children at all and have no plans to have any children at all. Very different than it's been for a significant period of time, and a lot of people will make objections to it, like, well, they had to have so many kids back then because they were worried that one of the kids might die because of some health epidemic or something like that, and so they just had to have multiple kids so that they, at least have someone to carry on the family tree and things like that. And maybe there is some type of, truth to that to an extent. But I mean, we're going to see at the end of this that Jacob's going to have 12 sons. And the 12 sons, there wasn't some impending disease that was coming over all of them, where half of them died before they made it to adulthood, and so they just had to have all of these children because there wasn't going to be a family otherwise. It was just something that they did, and that that was the main focus back then. Again, taking it back to just gathering land, taking care of land, taking care of livestock, and just having all of these different things. The more children that you have, the easier it's going to be to take care of a wide range of land and take care of the livestock and things like that without having to go and get other servants. And then someday when you die, you'll be able to give that land to your descendants, and be able to basically pass it down to them. Very long fast forward, but basically we're going to see that Jacob will have 12 sons, and that they will have a very large portion of land that's going to be divided to the 12 of them. And throughout the rest of the Old Testament, you're going to regularly hear references back to the 12 tribes of Israel, and basically all of the different people that came from them, and the land that they would have, how God would work in each one of them, how each one of them would be different from one another, but basically they all are coming, and we're seeing the start of that take place right here. But it's just a much different outlook on life, and that children are something that, were a very large priority in people's lives, and today, for the most part, they're not. I think that within churches, they still are. But I think that a large part of our culture, unfortunately, just doesn't really want anything to do with children. And you don't know that about every case. So if you see a younger family that's childless and doesn't have any children, don't assume that they just don't want to have kids and that they don't, because maybe they do, and maybe they've been trying for years and just haven't been able to. I know people that would give anything to have more kids than they have, or to even have kids in the first place. And so don't just, assume that someone is not trying to have kids and someone doesn't want to have children. You don't know that about anybody, all right? And that's honestly a pretty personal thing to ask somebody, so don't even bring it up or ask about it. You never know. But in general, though, it's not an unfair assumption to say that a large majority of young American families today just have no desire for children. And to be honest with you, it's kind of the opposite, taking it back to how we're thinking about a large area, being able to take care of lots of land, take care of lots of livestock, things like that, so you have all these kids to help you do that. People are almost incentivized financially not to have kids. Well, I wouldn't even say almost. You are incentivized not to have kids financially because they are expensive. It's expensive to have a baby, to go to the hospital and pay for just the baby to be born. And then it's even more expensive to take them home and pay for the diapers and the wipes and all the new stuff that you have to have, especially the first time that you have a baby. And then, as they get older, and the food, groceries would definitely be a lot less expensive for us if we had 3 less mouths to feed that every day seem like they're eating more and more than they did the day before that. The grocery bill just keeps on going up. It's not necessarily that the prices are that much more expensive, but it's just that we have that many more mouths to feed. Especially going out to eat. Man, they're so much smaller than us, but in terms of just the price, it's almost like they're the same as us going out and getting something out from menu. It's literally more than double if we take the kids with us to go out to eat somewhere. So it's expensive, but I think that is something that people think about today, is basically they don't want to have kids because they want to be able to have money, and they are financially incentivized not to have kids, and that's a really unfortunate thing, because at the end of the day, if the only thing we're really going for and shooting for in life is just money, that's it, At least you could say somebody, back even 200 years ago, there was going to be a significantly wealthy person. Yes, we had a currency in the United States, but more important than currency was land. And most of the time, people were using that land to farm. At least 200 years ago, you could look at a very wealthy person and they could show you, this is all of the land that I own. This is all of the food and things that I provide to society and good and things like that. Today, you have people doing every single thing that they can just to be able to open up their bank app on their phone and show a high dollar amount in their phone. They've never even held the cash in their hands of the money that they have, just the digital app on their phone, the credit card. Some aren't even using the credit card, it's just their phone with the tap to pay, and they go up to the register and just boop, and then pay for their stuff and then they're on. But people are just trying to do everything that they can today to gather up all this money. And what I'm saying this as a young person, but I'm just kind of forward thinking and thinking about the next, decades of my life, if I'm able to have them, but is that at 50, 60, 70 years old, if all I have is a bunch of money and I don't have anyone to give it to, and I don't have anyone to enjoy the blessings that God has given me with, other than just my friends, who at that point are probably going to have their own families and things like that, what's the point of any of it? What's the point of getting, hundreds and millions of dollars? What's the point of getting a large bank account? What's the point of having an enormous 401k, of any of these things, of the massive house, the super nice car, or the extravagant vacation, or anything, traveling the world? What's the point of any of it? At the end of the day, you're just going to die. And then all of the things that you've worked your whole entire life for, that they don't matter, and that they just fade away someday. And then someday, if you're saved, the judgment seat of Christ, when you go to have your works tried, that you just throw the wood, hay, and stubble of all those things, and it's just burning up. And you enter into eternity doing nothing for Christ, and having no one to share any of those things with here on earth. I understand that not everybody can, and I'm not saying, and I'm not ignorant to the fact that there are a lot of challenges with having children. But I do think that we should make it more of a priority in our culture. And I'm not really talking to anybody in this room or anything specific like that. I'm just comparing the differences between our culture today and the culture that they had back then. And there is a big difference in the way that they looked at children in the book of Genesis, all throughout the Old Testament, even up until recent history in the United States of America. The children were seen as a blessing. Children were seen as something that we weren't going to live without. Children were seen as a necessity. Now children are seen as an inconvenience. And I think it's just a sad thing. And that because of that, now we see all the different things like abortion come onto the scene. And we see that as something that we need to have. We have to have access to it so that we can get rid of the inconveniences in our lives. It's sad, and really the only thing that we can do is pray. We can lead a good example by living life, by having children that we have control of, that we love. We have families that love each other and children that are happy and things like that. To be an example to people and say, hey, look, children don't have to be chaotic. Children don't have to just be the worst thing that ever happened to you in your life. Children can be the greatest blessing you've ever had. I couldn't imagine my life without my kids. And I'm extraordinarily grateful for them. And I think that a lot more people in America could do the same thing. But it's just a faith thing, and trusting that the Lord's going to take care of them, like He said that He would, and trusting that we're going to continue to work hard and provide for our families and everything like that as the leaders of our households and things like that. So, kind of a different sermon. Obviously, focusing on the things that took place in Genesis chapter number 29, and thinking about the story of Jacob and Rachel and Leah and the servitude that happened there for him to be able to work and get to those things. But towards the end, and as we get into the next chapters, you're going to see all the different children being born and things like that. And I think most people in America living today would think about a house that has 12 kids in it and lose their minds. But they thought of it as an amazing blessing and the greatest thing that ever happened to them. So just think about these things, and just because our culture is different today doesn't necessarily mean it's better in all areas. There's definitely areas that need to be improved, but not all of them. So let's close in word of prayer. Father, I thank you so much for all that you've done for us, Lord. I thank you for the blessings that you've given us. I thank you for your word that's so clear and all of these different things, Lord. I just pray that you would help us to be able to just love you, Lord, and to be able to continue to follow you, and just pray that you would help us to be able to read your word and obviously look at the different mistakes that were made by the different people in the Old Testament and even the people in the New Testament, Lord, and be able to model our lives and make sure that we don't make those same mistakes, Lord. But help us also to just look at the example of all the good things that they did, Lord, and try to mirror those things in our lives the best that we can. So, Father, I thank you for all those things you've done for us. Thank you for your Son, ultimately, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, you're dismissed.